It was almost midnight. Snow fell in thin, steady sheets softening the city sounds into a low, steady hush. The office tower cut a slash of bright glass against the dark, an island of light in a winter sea. Marcus Green locked the door to his outer office, his coat heavy with damp, and turned to go. That was when he saw her, a small figure sitting on the low bench by the reception desk, knees pulled up, a backpack at her feet. Her hair had snow in it. Her shoes were worn at the heels. She looked as if she had been waiting for a long time. He paused without meaning to. The lobby was vast and empty, the vaulted ceiling holding a faint echo. The receptionist's chair was empty. The security camera's red LED blinked. Marcus moved closer, the leather of his shoes soft against the polished floor. The little girl looked up, then leaned forward, and so quietly he could have missed it if he had not been listening for something, said, "My mommy is sick." The words were small and precise. Marcus felt as if someone had flicked on a light inside him. For the first time that day, he stopped thinking about the next quarter, about mergers and memos and the list of meetings that had already made his calendar a blur. He was left without a ready answer, speechless, for reasons he would later try to name but could not yet face outright. He watched the girl for a long breath. She had the blunt honesty of a child who trusted her whisper would be heard. She curled her fingers around the strap of her backpack, the way a person might cling to a rope. Marcus's mouth was empty of words, his palms warm from the coat he held. The image of the little girl remained with him as he drove home, in the falling snow, the whisper folding into him and refusing to be ignored. He could have kept walking. Did not. If the small voice makes you stop, if it reaches something inside you, consider sharing this story with someone who needs to remember how a single moment can change a life. That night, Marcus sat in his kitchen and did not sleep. He had a mind built for strategy, but the whisper had rearranged priorities. He opened his laptop and, without thinking in managerial terms, which interested him less in that hour, he began to look. It was not a cold exercise. He felt exposed, like someone who had stumbled into a room and seen the people there in a light they had not meant for him to see. In the employee records, he found a name, Lily Parker. A neat line of dates and titles. Nothing that spoke of anything unusual. But the security footage told a different story. In the grainy clips he watched, Lily moved through the night like a small, tireless current. She arrived before the cleaners, briefing began, and often stayed after their last sweep. The camera caught her stopping in mid-step, hand pressed to her side, face pinched with something she hid from anyone who might have thought to ask. In one clip, she stood in the break room doorway, leaning on the frame as if the structure itself were the only reliable thing to hold her upright, a faint tremor passing across her jaw before she squared her shoulders and returned to work. He watched her smile at a passing executive with a grace that acknowledged invisible boundaries and refused to cross them. He watched her take a call in a doorway and cover the receiver as if to shield a child's ears. In another clip, she crouched to tug a wrapper from under a trash bin, then sat on the floor to tie a child's shoe long after the cleaning crew had finished. The footage was not pure evidence. It was a portrait composed of small, testifying moments. It suggested a life lived in steps too fast for the body sometimes to follow, a quiet competence threaded through with strain. A photo on Lily's company profile taken for ID showed a thin, steady face and eyes that did not ask for pity. Beside that, an old job history noted a brief stint in medical school. The line of dates stopped unexpectedly. There was no explanation. Marcus found himself imagining the reasons: the cost of tuition, the pressure of bills, the fact that studying in single parenthood do not always share the same weather. He had always been able to write checks to fix problems, to stamp an approval on a plan that might help a team. But this felt different. It felt like walking into the private life of someone he had only met through a building's flow of people. That image of the little girl in the lobby kept coming back. He saw her clutching a stuffed animal in a broken, holey backpack. He saw her eyes when she whispered. In the memory of his own childhood, the whisper unlocked something else. The smell of hospital disinfectant, the small wooden chair by his mother's bed, the way her knuckles had looked when she pressed a blanket to her chin. He had been 12 the night his mother had worked a double and collapsed on her way home. He had been too young to do anything but watch. The weight of that memory had shaped many of his choices: how he worked, how he led, and how he avoided certain conversations that might reveal too much. He did not tell anyone he was watching. He did not brief his executive assistant. He did not make a show of concern. Instead, in the quiet hours, he began to set things in motion the way a craftsman might, by small, precise movements that leave no blunt mark. He used channels that bypassed publicity, a call to Janet, the night shift supervisor, a conversation with the human resources director framed as an inquiry rather than an order, a message to the security team to run certain clips for training purposes. Nothing bore his signature. He leaned on systems rather than spectacle. Janet answered on the second ring. Her voice had the no-nonsense warmth he had heard in shift reports. He spoke without prefacing grand admission, only a fact that needed to be accounted for. There are staff who can't be working this hard every night, he said, and left the sentence broad enough to include many lives. They moved quietly, a little more pay on the next payroll, rooted to Lily without a headline, a reassignment from the most physically demanding night rounds to a position that allowed more supervision and used her medical training. Janitorial oversight, minor wellness checks, without announcing a transfer. Enrollment in the company's wellness program, described to Lily in a human voice as an offer of resources available to employees, not as charity. The wellness manager prepared information packets and counseling appointments under the guise of a standard outreach initiative. These acts were anonymous in execution and careful in tone. Marcus did not want a photograph, a plaque, or a press release. He wanted the changes to matter to the people who lived them, not to the people who would applaud them. He believed in systems that could outlast particular kinds, gestures, policies, and practices that could be used again and again. He also believed in the soft, invisible things. A warmer break room, a replacement mop that did not make the work more dangerous, a small new locker to keep medication at a safe temperature. He put these in motion and watched them begin to show up in quiet ways. Lily noticed. She noticed the thicker coffee in the break room, the fresh pair of rubber gloves in her locker, the little envelope tucked into the payroll notice with an increased amount and a line that read only, adjustment. She read the wellness brochure and folded it once, twice, like someone who keeps a small thing close to decide later. It all felt like questions without a questioner. She was not foolish. She knew the world had people with power. Her life had taught her to guard dignity the way some people guard money. When help comes from above, it can feel like an erasure. She had worked hard for every shift. She took pride in cleaning and in keeping the building, and she had taught Sophie at an early age that people keep themselves by their work. So she came to the office after her shift one evening and asked quietly, "Who changed my schedule?" They found him in the atrium, the place where marble met glass, where a sliver of sky was reflected and made small. He had come early that night to watch the snow gather on the plaza. He did not flinch when Lily appeared. He had not expected to be confronted. She was not accusatory. She was steady, and there was a careful hardness to her voice that Marcus recognized as the border before someone allows pity through. "I didn't ask for help," she said. "I don't want to be pitied. I make what I make and I stretch it. I don't sign up to be someone's project." Marcus listened. He could feel the old machinery in his chest, the desire to explain, to fix, to reassure, but he sat with the fact that an explanation could be another kind of taking away. He told her a story instead, a single, private thing. "When I was a kid," he said quietly, "my mother worked nights. She came home tired and told me jokes, so I would go to sleep. One night, she didn't come. I kept thinking I would have reached her if I had been running faster, calling sooner. I learned to make a list of reasons after that, reasons to numb the guilt, excuses to keep myself going. I didn't always look up when someone needed help. The admission was not a plea for absolution. It was a handing over of a piece of himself so she would understand why he had acted without fanfare. He did not ask for gratitude. "I don't want to rescue you," he said, choosing the words with care. "I want you to be seen. Help from here on isn't about taking from you. It's about making sure you have what you need to keep your dignity while you keep doing the work you do." Lily's eyes searched his face. He was a man used to being obeyed. Here, his authority had no immediate purchase. "Seen," she echoed, as if tasting the word to see whether it might be an action she could accept. She stood with her arms folded. I can look after my daughter. I just won't be the kind of person who gets her life rewritten by pity. They left it there. She walked away, holding her head high. Marcus watched the line of her shoulders recede and felt both the sting of refusal and a rising respect. He had not wanted to erase her agency. He had wanted a way to make it possible for her to choose, free of the shaming that sometimes accompanied help. For a while, that fragile balance held. Lily took the new schedule and used the wellness checkups as an appointment she kept because it was sensible, not because it defined her. She wore a new pair of gloves and never mentioned the pay adjustment. Marcus thought the matter settled. He thought he had done the small and right things, and that would be that. Then, on a night meant for ordinary work, the urgency uncapped itself. She was sweeping the north corridor when she doubled over. For a passing second the camera showed her fingers splayed against the wall, the angle of her body wrong in a way that always meant something more than the body's protest. A janitor to doors down noticed. He called to her. The hallway answered with silence. Somewhere, Sophie sat in the lobby with her backpack and a slow, increasing anxiety, trying to count minutes as if numbers could control the world. Security replayed the footage on a loop. Janet called down the chain. The call came to Marcus as a ring through a small speaker in his study. He was meeting midway through a presentation about retention, when the phone vibrated with an urgent line he could not ignore. He excused himself and drove without thinking. No hand-wringing, no phone calls too legal, new hesitation. The sky had emptied its snow into the city's veins. He drove through wet streets, heart thudding, thinking only of a small figure who had once whispered words into a lobby and had left them lodged in him. When he reached the building, the lobby was chaotic in a low-wake quiet, panicked, organized. Sophie sat on the same bench, knees drawn to her chin, her face wet. A security guard crouched beside her, his radio buzzing. Janet's jacket was streaked with dust. Marcus's thoughts snapped into sharp actions. He moved forward without ceremony and asked where Lily was. They pointed to the north corridor. He found her there, leaning against a linen closet, eyes unfocused, a single tear streaking down a cheek that had not wanted to be seen crying. Her collapse was not cinematic in the way movies stage such things. It was small and brutal, an emergency made of human fragility and the sudden inability to breathe through it. Sophie tried to stand. A security guard held her down gently, as if to say, "Wait." Marcus did not. He lifted Lily between his arms with a strength that surprised him. She was lighter than he feared. The reality of the situation removed any remaining distance between them. No boardroom protocol applied at that moment. He carried her, careful and quick, through the building and into his car, as if the distance between floors could be closed with motion and will. The drive to the hospital was a series of urgent turns. Marcus thought of his mother the whole way, of not being there, of the way absence had hardened into a kind of strategy for his life. He vowed, in a way that was less about drama and more about immediate fact, "I will not be late again." At the emergency entrance, the medical team took over with quiet efficiency. Marcus handed over Sophie to a nurse with a voice that made her feel known, then waited, because waiting was the only thing he could do that mattered. It was not his business to intrude into the clinical work. He could only remain present, providing what the system required in a way that respected the professionals who ran it. The diagnosis was not simple, but it was clear enough. A severe flare of an autoimmune condition, lupus, had been driven fragile by chronic stress and sleep deprivation. The doctors explained in precise, measured terms what the disease involved, that it could be managed, that it would require medication, monitoring, rest, and adjustments to work and lifestyle. There would be no miraculous cure. There would be careful follow-up, specialists, and time. Marcus arranged for what he could: payment, transportation, and immediate care without making it an event in the company. He asked for specialists, called people who could move things quickly without a press release. He had access to resources most employees would not even suspect existed. He used them, but the larger change he insisted upon was not money alone. He asked HR to guarantee paid leave for the period the doctors prescribed. to create a position that would use Lily's medical knowledge and spare her from constant physical strain, and to set up a discreet fund to handle any ongoing medical costs. He signed nothing in public. Everything was handled through channels designed to preserve Lily's dignity and autonomy. When Lily woke hours later, the first thing she saw was Sophie asleep in a hospital chair. Hair splayed across her shoulder, Marcus stood at a distance, hands clasped in front of him as if embarrassed by their own utility. There was no triumph in his face, only the raw look of someone who had done what he could and was learning how to live with the memory of not having done enough once before. She blinked at him, eyes still glassy. "You shouldn't have," she said simply, as if gratitude and reproach could be the same thing without contradiction. "I couldn't stand the thought of you not being seen," Marcus said. "I wanted to make it possible for you to keep your dignity while you did the things you were already doing." She looked at Sophie, then at the window where a winter sky held the steady fall of new snow. "Dignity doesn't mean a life without help," she said slowly. "It means help that listens." Months of care followed. Medicine stabilized inflammation. Counseling helped untangle anxiety from exhaustion. The company adjusted Lily's role to something sustainable, a position that allowed her to use her medical knowledge to train other night staff in basic wellness checks, in recognizing signs of strain, and in safe responses to minor emergencies. The job made use of her competence and acknowledged the intelligence she had not abandoned when life demanded priority shift. It did not make her into a different person. It preserved the identity that had always been hers, a careful, responsible woman who wanted her daughter safe and proud. Marcus did not make the help into a spectacle. He started a small internal program that offered the kinds of supports that no single case could exhaust: wellness checks, a soft fund for medical emergencies, changes to shift expectations, and paid leave policies that acknowledged that people had lives outside of efficiency charts. He included training for supervisors to spot the signs of hidden strain. He put systems in place so the next small voice in a lobby would not need to whisper to be heard. He also arranged a scholarship fund in Sophie's name, a set of contributions to assist with school and extracurriculars, not grandiose but steady, and quietly pledged support for community programs that helped single parents. The foundation he seeded was small, deliberate, and tied to practical outcomes: childcare vouchers, transportation assistance, and grants to help employees finish interrupted education. It did not carry his face on a billboard. In the weeks and months that followed, Lily regained strength. She learned to accept help as one part of a larger equation rather than a penance. Sophie grew in confidence. She wore a new coat one winter and twirled in the snow like a small comet. The family began to find new weather. Their relationship with Marcus developed not into a staged paternalism, but into a kind of careful friendship that respected boundaries. He showed up for school plays, once quietly buying tickets that a coworker handed to Lily with no fanfare. He brought soup when the weather was unkind. He sat in the back of a community meeting, no chi taken. New record kept listening as parents talked about schedules and school lunches. Sometimes he was present as a man who had power. More often, he learned to be present as a person who could listen. There were awkward moments. He fumbled a line of explanation to a staff member once and felt mortal in a way he had rarely allowed himself to be. Lily did not always accept the gifts he offered. There were evenings when she called him by his title in a tone that reminded him to keep his distance. They negotiated a language to speak across their differences, a language of mutual respect. The company culture shifted gradually because it was anchored in small acts and practical policies, not a single day of epiphany. Supervisors were trained to notice, not to assume. Wellness checks became routine. Pay adjustments were no longer a secretive envelope but a process that acknowledged market realities and human needs. The fund handled emergencies without making individuals feel exposed. The night crew, which had been invisible in Marcus's past, slowly emerged into being treated with the steadiness they deserved. One winter evening, more than a year after the whisper, the three of them stood on the plaza outside the tower. The snowfall had softened into the kind of drifting that makes the world look deliberate and small. Marcus walked with an odd lightness in his step. He had not become a better man in the sense of moral delirium. He had simply become someone who acted with a particular kind of attention he had once been afraid to practice. Sophie tugged at his sleeve and climbed a low planter to look at a frozen reflection. She laughed at a scrap of ice. Lily walked beside them with a neat scarf looped around her neck, moved by an ease that had not been present a year earlier. They did not hold hands in a way that declared family in a tidy stamp. They moved together with a hesitant comfort that grew more assured with each season. Sophie hopped off the planter, dusted snow from her knees, and then, with the solemnity of children offering tests that adults sometimes fail, leaned up and whispered into Marcus's ear, "My mommy is sick." The words arrived like they had before, sharp, small, demanding attention. For a sliver of a second, Marcus was transported back to the night in the lobby, back to the frozen moment that had opened his life to a new kind of responsibility. He felt the old helplessness in the same place. His chest kept it, a memory of a boy who had been late. But this time, the echo was different. He was speechless again, but not because he had nothing to do. He was speechless because the world had given him a second chance to make a different kind of answer. He did not try to offer grand words. He wrapped his coat a little tighter and looked down at Sophie with a tenderness that was gentle, not theatrical. He could have promised everything and little. Instead, he nodded, and the nod held the whole of the work that had been done in months and in weeks and in the private, administrative acts that made lives possible. The hush around them made the nod seem like a covenant. It was a small scene that contained all the ways change happens. A whisper, a listening, the awkwardness of pride and the steadiness of help. No one was cured of the memory of illness, and no one pretended the path ahead would be easy. There would be appointments and flare-ups, and there would be days when fatigue returned like a shadow. But there would also be a system that recognized strain before it became ruin, a provision of care, a child whose school clothes were warm, and a woman whose competence was not lost behind the label of who had once noticed her in a lobby. Marcus found himself speechless, and in that silence there was a presence he had lacked before. He could not take back the years he had been late for someone else. He could only carry forward what he had learned. That power is best used to widen the circle of being seen. That dignity can be protected by both policy and small human attentions. And that a whispered plea in a lobby might be the exact thing that keeps a family together if someone finally chooses to listen. They walked together through the soft fall of snow. No applause followed them down the plaza. There was only the quiet of a city that had seen many nights, and the steady imprint of 3 pairs of footprints where, until not long before, there had been only the echo of one. The whisper had been spoken, and the man who had been left speechless the first night had learned to be present in the silence that followed.